Now we have nice authentication forms for our Paparazzi application, but I would like them to be completely centered in the middle of the page. As you can see at the moment, they're only horizontally centered, but not vertically centered. And to achieve that is a little bit more work than it looks like. So your first instinct might be to wrap all of that page in a flex div and use item center and justify center to align it in the middle of the page. So let's try that. I'm going to wrap all of this in a div and make it a flex container that is centered horizontally and vertically. Now for this to work, we need to make sure that the container is using 100% of the heights available, so h full, and we need to do the same for its parent container. So we need to go to the app.view component and make this also a h full. Okay, so that works. Our panel is now completely aligned in the middle of the page, but look at what happens if I reduce the heights of the screen. As you can see, the flex container takes its job very seriously and align our panel no matter what in the center. So even when we don't actually have space for the panel to be completely displayed in the screen, it will still align the middle of the panel to the middle of our page. And that's not what we want. Ideally, when the page becomes smaller than the panel itself, we should only see the top of it and allow the user to scroll down to see the rest of our panel. So let's see how we can improve on that. I'm going to resize our browser and go back to our editor. So let's revert what we've done here and go back to our auth login component. Now I'm going to take you through another solution that fixes this problem. And for you to see a little bit better what we're doing, I'm going to give this container a red background. Okay, so for this to work, we need to make sure that the red background takes all of the space available from that page. So anything from below the navbar to the bottom of the page. And we can do that by using the absolute position. So let's do that. Absolute. And we'll also give it inset 0 for it to stick to every corner. So that's the equivalent to top 0, bottom 0, right 0, and left 0. Okay, so now if I save this, you can see that it really does cover everything, but we don't want it to cover the navbar, so let's fix this. We'll go back to our app.view component, and this is the section that takes care of the navbar, whilst this is the section that takes care of the content of the page. So in order for our absolute positioning not to affect the navbar, we need to make this relative. Okay, so that's good, but now we also need to bring our padding back to our new container. So we will copy all of this and go back to our auth login component, and we'll paste that here. So it looks like we haven't made much progress because the panel is still not aligned vertically, but we're now much closer to be able to do that. The trick here is to understand that regular HTML blocks do understand MX Auto, which means that it will be aligned horizontally, but Flex Container, not only they understand MX Auto, but they also understand MY Auto, which means it will be aligned vertically. And to do both at the same time, we simply need to write M Auto. So now if I save this, it's not going to work because the parent div is a block and not a flex container. So let's fix that. We'll write flex and let's remove that red background that we don't need anymore. Okay, so now we're reaching a state again where our panel is perfectly aligned in the middle of our page. But this time, if I reduce the height of the page, it's going to stop centering the panel when it doesn't have enough space to do so. So now we can see the top of our panel, but if I scroll down, we can see the rest of it. And the reason we had to go through this and create an absolute div to go on top of our original container is because unfortunately the two layouts that we want for the content of our pages are not compatible. On one hand, we want a regular page, which is going to be aligned to the top and allow the user to scroll down if there is more content. And on the other hand, we want to center our content perfectly without it to look buggy when the height of the screen becomes too small. So I think this is a good solution that makes the best of both worlds. But we don't want to have to write absolute inset 0 flex and copy paste all of the padding of our main container every time we want to have a page that's going to be centered. So let's improve that a little bit by creating a new base component that's going to encapsulate all of that code for us. So let's copy all of that and create a new component in our components directory, and we'll call it base center container. Now inside that container, we're going to copy paste what we had in our auth login components and remove its contents. And we'll replace that with the slot. Now we can keep most of these classes, but W full and max width small are dependent on the page itself. If you remember, we had a different max width for the registration page. So for that reason, we really need those two classes to be dependent on the page itself and not being applied by default to all of them. So we'll just remove them from here and allow the user of that component to define them in a wrapper props. So now all that's left to do is to define that props down here. So props wrapper string. Now, if you remember on a previous episode, we've dynamically registered base components, which means that any component that starts with base will automatically be globally registered. That means I can go back to my auth login component and I can start using the base center container directly in the template. So base center container, and we'll put our panel directly on there. And we'll specify that our wrapper needs to have a full width and a maximum width of small. So here, wrapper is this, and now we can remove this altogether. Okay, so now we have exactly the same as what we had before, except that now when we want to have a page which is perfectly centered in the middle, all we have to do is use the base center container. So let's do that for our other pages. Let's copy base center container and go to auth register. Now all we have to do is replace the div that wraps the base panel with base center container. So this, and then class becomes wrapper, and we only need to keep the width and the max width. Now just to double check, if I increase the size of the screen, we can still see our image right here. And if I reduce the height of the screen, you can see that our panel sticks to the top and allows the user to scroll down. Okay, next let's go to our forgot your password page. And that will be the auth password email component. And again, we will transform that div with a base center container, replace that class with the wrapper prop, and remove mxauto. And let's do that one last time with the auth password reset component, which we can access by putting a fake token here. So div replaced with base center container, wrapper, remove mxauto, and all done. Okay, so in this episode we've done two things. The first thing was to create a new layout that perfectly aligns the content of our pages. And the second thing was to refactor it into a base components that we can now reuse into any page that we want. So for example, in the future, we could reuse that component if we have pages that simply display a form or pages that simply represent empty states. In the next episode, we will design our first page that actually displays paparazzi data. And that's going to be the page that lists all of the paparazzi for a user.